Every side of the conflict in Iraq is now using American weapons. Let's take a closer look at how that happened for a second, shall we? Well, the US military pulled out of the country in 2011, but as we know, they left a deadly legacy, more than $9 billion worth of weapons. Much of this American firepower was captured by Islamic State fighters sweeping into northern Iraq from Syria, where they had already got hold of US weapons that Washington had already supplied to those anti-Assad forces. So now, US arms are being used on two sides of the barricades in Iraq, and America's having to send more of its hardware, American hardware, to the Kurds to help them repel the jihadists right now. Let's get some reaction to this. It's gone round a full circle from former US Foreign Service employee Peter Van Buren joining us on the line. Hi there, Peter. We'll talk about this big twist, this big turn that these weapons are doing. It's American weapons fighting American weapons, certainly in a minute. But first of all, Mary Harf, the US State Department, has been speaking just in the last few minutes. She had something to say about what she thinks is the cause of all this. She's blaming Syria and Assad. Let's listen.
ISIS started really gaining strength in Syria when Assad, facilitated their rise, helped facilitate their movement into Iraq, and gave them a security environment in which they could operate. Prime Minister Maliki has been fighting a very serious battle against them in his own country. Yes, he could have governed more inclusively, but that's very different than allowing a terrorist group to flourish and indeed supporting them.
Mary, you're saying he facilitated their movement from Syria to Iraq. I mean, did he provide them with truck and transportation?
I don't have more specifics for you than that.
So you don't think that the Syrian regime was actually fighting ISIL in Syria?
Look, I know that they supported their rise and they helped facilitate them into Iraq. I know that.
So as to say, when you want to hear more specifics, they've often never got it. But what do you think about this theory that it's been Assad that's been basically planting the seed for ISIS to grow here, the Islamic State, rather?
I think this just shows the desperation of the State Department in particular and the U.S. government in general to try to paint this picture as something other than America's mistakes. ISIS, until very recently, was part of a broad Sunni group in Syria that was being supplied by the United States and was and still is being funded by American allies in Saudi and Kuwait and other Sunni states. Blaming Assad for all this is absolutely beyond my understanding how an intelligent person can even say that. In addition, the United States, who was opposing Assad fairly recently, has gotten back in bed with him and is now encouraging Assad to bomb his side of the Syrian-Iraqi border in order to push back against the ISIS people whom the United States was recently supporting. If that sounds confusing, it is. But any attempt by the State Department to sort of paint this as an Assad problem or a problem caused by Assad is simply beyond belief.
Well, maybe that's why I was to say the specifics weren't forthcoming there for a minute anyway. But taking this more seriously, the US has been ruling out boots on the ground, most certainly, but it wasn't that long ago they're ruling out airstrikes. What would it take now if this goes further to bring boots back onto the ground in Iraq, do you think?
Well, what we've got here is the classic slippery slope. This is how bigger wars start. You begin with a few advisors, and of course we already have 300 combat troops, mostly special forces, already in Iraq. I'm certain their boots don't physically touch the ground. I'm certain they step over things. But the point is there's 300 people on the ground already. You've then escalated to airstrikes. Some of those airstrikes are claimed to protect the 300 people on the ground. Well, you pretty soon then have to move towards protecting the aircraft that fly overhead. You've got to have search and rescue in position. And at the point where ISIS or perhaps Maliki's own militia in Baghdad physically threaten the American embassy or the American consulate in Erbil, it's very difficult to see how you can defend those facilities without boots on the ground. America has also stationed troops and Apache attack helicopters at Baghdad International Airport in order to keep the airport open should more troops need to come in or should America's diplomats need to be evacuated out. It's difficult, again, to imagine defending that airport without combat troops in action on the ground. We saw this in Vietnam. We're watching it play out today
and
in
I
Iraq.
wonder whether the comments from the Pentagon as well already, and what they've been 5 or maybe a bit more than that airstrikes, but they're already saying it's not been successful. And I wonder if that's a prelude to boots on the ground as well, when you're hearing that kind of message coming from the Pentagon. And, of course, on top of this now, they're talking about arming the Kurds to carry out the dirty work.
Your reporting piece just before we began talking shows the absolute absurdity of arming the Kurds. American weapons that we supplied to Iraq and to ISIS are being turned against us now. It's very difficult to imagine how weapons given to the Kurds will not somehow end up in the wrong hands. It's also very difficult to imagine how weapons given to the Kurds will not at some point be turned against the Iraqi Shia army, should it attempt to intervene, or perhaps at a later date against Turkey over the disputed territory between Kurdistan and the Turks. The idea of introducing more weapons into a battlefield to actually make things better is, again, I'm sorry, bordering on absurd. The only people happy here are the American arms merchants. American weapons are being used to destroy other American weapons. If you're selling those weapons, that's called good business.
Live from New York, former US Foreign Service employee Mark Van Buren, thank you for your thoughts.